Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a game from the 1996 Russian Chess Championship between Alexander Khalifman and Evgeny Sveshnikov. We have Khalifman on the white end opening with d4. Game enters a queen's gambit declined, knight f3, and c6, setting up a semi-slav structure, this pawn triangle. And this is the first moment where black is ready to take on c4 and hang on to it. Keep in mind that positions prior to this c6 advance, such as this one here, black is not in a position to grab the pawn and hang on to it. For one, you could give a check and win it back with the queen, but do know that you also have simply e3 available to you, looking to develop and win that pawn back. b5 would be an example of a failed attempt at trying to hang on to a pawn, as would come a4, and then b3. These two pawn advances do in fact show up in this game. White would be doing very well in this position. Bishop's ready to come out and grab that pawn on b5 if takes. But we don't have that. But an important point is certainly this one right here, because if you're playing on the white side and you're not a fan of gambit play, queen c2 and knight to d2 are two very good alternatives, looking to defend c4 directly and only then proceed with a kingside fianchetto. In this game we have the immediate g3. White is open to gambit play, in other words. Black declines it, knight f6, or at least for just this one move declines the capture. Only after bishop g2 do we have d takes c. White takes, and b5. You cannot hang on to this pawn without playing b5, and so you might as well play b5 right away and maintain some flexibility with your other pieces. Still comes a4. Why would you want to do this? Well, you're helping to activate your pieces. Your rook is going to spring to life. Bishop to b7. Knight to e5, one of these two birds with one stone type of moves, activating two pieces with just one move. Very nice central post for the knight, and finally the bishop can see on the longest diagonal. Queen to b6 is there to defend b7, as was threatened a takes b. The bishop was unprotected on b7, so the queen is there to support it. And still now b3, cracking at this structure. So these two moves are helping to do what? Activate the rook with a4, break down this pawn on c4, and maybe grant the queen the b3 square, which is exactly what we have in this one. C takes b, queen takes b, and now knight to d7. Development and challenging the one piece in the black position. This is a moment where black can, if he is super greedy, can grab on d4, but that's maybe starting to be a little bit too crazy, because even though you have now two pawns, if you're playing on the black side, you're up two pawns now. Look at all of the activity by the white pieces. The only inactive white piece is the knight on b1, but he's not long off from maybe putting pressure on b5. Pretty much all of the white pieces are working in this position. I only see maybe one piece that's decent looking on the black side, the knight on f6. The queen seems like she's maybe going to be hit at some point. Knight a3 to c4 at some point could show itself. If we have a6, this is actually an important motif to be aware of. This knight a3, c4, as soon as this a pawn moves, and sometimes that is needed to give support to b5. If the queen's unprotected, we might have this knight hop into c4. But we don't have that. We don't have black trying to grab another pawn. Instead, challenges the knight on e5. There are other options. You don't have to grab the pawn, certainly. You don't have to play this. You might want to, even on the black side, focus on kingside castling as soon as possible. I know black is at this point 3 moves away from being fully developed, but maybe it's best to look at it as, I need 2 moves to get my king to safety, and that should maybe take precedence over making a knight move at this point. It was an option, bishop to e7 with castles, but instead knight to d7. Bishop to e3. opposite the queen, so this move would fail to double attack against knight and queen, and white is also threatening to simply push the pawn, unleashing a discovered attack and striking at that central pawn on e6. So how does black cope with this? Well, c5 is there, and this is where it starts to get a little bit iffy, because what do we have with c5? c5 is apparently welcome to pawn exchanges and the opening up of the position at a moment when you are behind in development. Still 2 moves away before castled on the king's side. But we have knight takes knight, knight takes knight, and here comes d5, striking at e6. There is another alternative. Instead of c5, after bishop e6, black could plant a knight on d5, not even allow this pawn's advance. And, well, if you're playing knight d5, you have to be content with, of course, your king being uncastled, but this is maybe not the easiest king position to exploit. Moves that might follow would be, well, for one, a5 is a little bit appealing because it threatens a6 to kick this bishop back. If queen c7, a6, this starts to look like a real pain if this pawn can get to a6, and now black is underdeveloping. And so maybe best would be queen to a6 as a result. That's very awkward. She seems very offside. Bishop d2, and now this is freeing up e4. If you're trying to maintain your knight position, you have to make this move. There's a lot of holes in the black position, but black is still up a pawn. I'm not usually a big fan of giving up material and trying to show compensation for it, but this is one where I would actually prefer to be white. But it's not a road we went down in this one here. After bishop e3, it was instead c5. Knight takes, and now d5. Breaking at e6. This pawn is still in a pin. Well, not still in a pin, is now in a pin. And there's also this b5 pawn that's being threatened at the same time. We have its capture, so black is not having to deal with pawn takes or queen takes. Probably just pawn takes was threatened at this point to open up the rook. So b takes a. This is the heart of the black structure that has just been given up, that has just been traded, the center pawn of this queenside structure. Without it, the 2 remaining pawns are now very weak. They're split, they're isolated, and they could drop off very easily. On top of that, black is now going to need an additional move before he is castled. Before I was talking about a bishop move and castles before the king is safe, but now that this knight is in a pin, black is going to have to do something about defending the knight, and only then try and get castled, but it's a long way off. There's too many issues for black to solve. E takes d, knight to c3. This isn't the only capture. There is bishop takes here, and what could follow is knight c3 takes, king takes. Black is up 2 pawns at this point, but again, these pawns are split. This knight is in a pin. Black still needs a lot of time before castled, and in the meantime, these rooks are going to get very active. So there's still going to be a lot of pressure if this is the variation black wanted to go with, taking on d5 with the bishop instead of the pawn. But it's e takes d instead, knight c3. There's a fork, but that's irrelevant at this point. Concrete line with knight d5. The queen is hit. The knight is picked up. You could take the bishop, but we get the rook in return, so that's not going to happen. Rook to d8 instead, defending the knight. Still just 2 moves away, but does black have 2 moves? Black isn't going to have 2 moves in this game. Bishop f4, simply getting out of the way. Queen to f6, and now queen to b5. This is a cool move, keeping the knight still in a pin and doing what more? Freeing the rook to grab on a7 or even come into a6. A very annoying piece to have to deal with, this white rook. two bishops here just controlling a ton of squares. The bishop on d5 is really the MVP at this point right now. We have bishop d6, and well, it's very, very difficult to even recommend anything for black at this point. After bishop d6, we saw rook to a6, and now there's this pin. If I'm to just go 2 moves back right here, something other than queen to f6, if bishop here, keep in mind that this bishop, again, doing great things. We could have this, and then this. Big trouble here for black. So we didn't have that. After bishop f4, it was queen f6, queen b5, bishop d6, and now rook to a6. I don't even know if bishop to e7 is any better, since we're just taking, still can't castle. There's 2 pieces hitting it. Another one is right around the corner. You can maybe even kick the rook away from defending the knight with bishop to c7. It's just bad news however you slice it. So bishop d6 is tried, rook a6, and after rook to b8, one cute little move, bishop to b7, putting the bishop in a pin, and now there's not anything to do about this bishop on d6 being won. If you have this knee-jerk type of reaction after rook to b8 by playing your queen back to a4, this queen can be kicked off of this diagonal. Well, if she tries to stay on the diagonal, well, now we could have bishop takes bishop. There's no longer this pin for just this one moment. Some queen check back here. The queen is there to block. So we don't have that. It's important to make sure you keep the queen right where she's at. And also, by playing bishop to b7, you're not allowing the rook to play up to this b6 square to try and break the pin on the d6 bishop. So a nice interference move, placing one of your own pieces in a pin, but anticipating some rook activity along the b file. Bishop takes, and this is not going anywhere. Maybe this was, at this point, played out of momentum, but black has given up a rook for a queen, and it's just not going to work out. These pawns are all very, very weak. The last thing you need to do for white is remove the glue of the position. If this was even holding it together, it's definitely going to be kicked from d7, either captured or forced to go elsewhere, and these pawns will be dropping off one by one soon enough. It's at this point that Sveshnikov threw in the towel. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care. Bye.